Hello, my name is Georgie and today I'm going to be talking to you about the British Carnivore Project's most recent study looking at the spatial and temporal drivers behind boldness, exploration and innovation in wild red foxes. We know that animal populations in urban environments often behave differently compared to their rural counterparts. These behavioural differences matter because traits like boldness, exploration and innovation could all affect how well animals cope with urban change and how likely they are to come into conflict with people or with novel challenges. Our towns and cities are still growing, and it is therefore important that we know how these changes may influence the behaviour of the wild animals we share these spaces with. However, studies investigating these differences in behaviours look at static ecological gradients from the present day, which ignore how the environment has changed over time and just how long a given area has been occupied by a species. Therefore, in order for us to get a better understanding of how wildlife may adapt to urbanisation going forward, we need to look more precisely at whether and how environmental changes influence animal behaviour to date. For this study, we choose to look at the red fox as an ideal model, as they are the most globally widespread terrestrial carnivore, and have been recorded in British cities since the 1930s. This work builds upon an existing study by the British Carnivore Project, which looks at boldness and innovation in response to urbanisation. A total of 284 sites throughout England, Scotland and Wales were used for this study across a wide variety of landscape types, including public parks, residential gardens, farmland, woodland and coastal regions. Each site was spaced at least 3.5 kilometres apart, as that is greater than the typical home range and dispersal distance of red foxes in the UK, and this reduced the risk of us sampling the same individuals across multiple sites. At each site, one of 8 novel object types was deployed with a food reward inside and activity monitored using an 8-man camera trap. Each setup was deployed for an average of 15.6 days. At each site, we looked for 3 key observable behaviours at the population level. The first being boldness, i.e. did a fox touch the novel object? We then looked at innovation. Was the fox able to manipulate the novel object to get to the food reward inside? We also looked at exploration. For this we looked at exploration diversity, or how many distinct exploratory actions were made by a fox when investigating the novel object. This included things like pawing, biting, licking and so on. We also measured the latency to both touch and solve the task at each site. Like in the previous 2023 study, we used ArcGIS to investigate the relationship between urbanisation and the target 3 behaviours, though this time we also added a temporal component. To look at time as a driver of behavioural change, we measured the change in urban land cover at each site between 1994 and 2020. We also marked population at a given site as either old or newly established based on a survey conducted in 1986, which documented fox population status throughout the UK. Sites which lay in areas where foxes were recorded in 1986 were considered old, while sites in areas where they were absent in the 1986 study were considered new. Our results showed that both bold and innovative behaviours were positively associated with urbanisation. However, there was no relationship between urbanisation on either the latency to touch or solve the task, nor the exploration diversity displayed. In terms of temporal drivers of fox behaviour, there is no relationship between the degree of urbanisation change at a site and the likelihood of a fox touching or solving the task. Additionally, there was no significant difference between the older and more newly established populations in their likelihood of engaging in bold behaviour. Despite this, older populations were significantly more likely to solve the task, with around a quarter of older populations doing so, while none of the newly established ones did. Older populations also displayed more exploratory behaviours compared to newly established populations. In conclusion, urban foxes are more likely to both touch and solve novel food-related tasks than rural foxes. Our key finding is that recent changes in urbanisation did not infer behaviour, but the length of time a population has been established in an urban area did. Boldness did not depend on whether a population was old or newly established, suggesting that this behaviour may emerge relatively early when foxes first colonised towns and cities. In contrast, innovation and exploration diversity, more complex behaviours, were much more strongly expressed in older populations that were already established in 1986. This suggests that long-term exposure to urban environments shapes which behaviours become common in a population and when. Boldness may arise relatively quickly, while sophisticated problem-solving and diverse exploratory behaviour build up over multiple generations in cities. This helps move the urban behavioural literature beyond simple urban versus rural comparisons, and can help us predict where especially innovative resource-exploiting populations are likely to occur. That could also have potential implications for how we manage human-fox interactions in cities. for example by targeting waste management and conflict mitigation in long-established urban fox hotspots, and may also apply to other urban adapting species. Finally, here's a list of references used. I would also like to thank all of the trusts, landowners and wildlife organisations who took the time to help us with this project, as well as to all the citizen scientists who collected data as well. Thank you also to all the research assistants involved in the British Carnivore project and to the researchers at the universities of Hull and Lincoln who authored this paper.